Well, I didn't really have anything major planned for my Tuesday stream I normally do. I just decided that, you know what, I'll just talk about topics that I normally cover as it relates to warfare and the future situations as far as the domestic situations we face and also the foreign invasion and World War III. So I was just going to, do a review of things I've discussed in the past, and I was going to see if people wanted to interact insofar as that's concerned, like maybe, ask any questions that they might have had about the work and other such things if they, showed any interest in it. Sort of see where people are with their personal preparations and other such issues. Now, I've been seeing things going on with, China being discussed and that they're having apparently some issues with their Yangtze River and, it's going to cause some potential electric issues. Well, knowing what we know about them, I would just simply have to say that I think that that's completely contrived, that they're doing this deliberately because, the Chinese can control the weather every bit as much as anybody else can that has that technology. I think they're doing that as an excuse without, overtly, conducting what appears to be deliberate economic warfare against us. I think they're doing that or making that excuse rather, because we know the Chinese media lies every bit as much as the Western media or Russian media or any media. I think they're lying about that. I really do. And if that's not the case, then they're outright controlling the weather to where they're trying to dry up that river for whatever reason. Because, see, they only do things when they know it's going to cause them the least amount of pain, but it's going to inflict the maximum amount of pain on us. Otherwise, it doesn't make much sense now, does it? I think that it's either a completely fabricated Chinese story that their media concocted, or they did decide to control the weather in such a way that, they did cause some Yangtze River dry-ups, just long enough for them to put such a crazy plan in order to where it gives them plausible deniability, as they always do, like how they faked a virus in Shanghai just so they could shut down the Shanghai port. Nothing else, just the port and the areas around it. That, to me, just too many things line up to where there's no way it's a coincidence. It's obviously orchestrated. It's obviously planned. Like they let Evergrande collapse. Like they weaponized smaller banks because they knew Western investments were tied to them. They're doing all of this stuff underhandedly, because that's how they do things, to hurt us. And they either dried up the river in real life to create this situation just long enough to where it offers them plausible deniability. They'll create rain again if they, when they feel they want to. That's how they do things. Or it's a completely fabricated, made-up story. We know they can do that too. China is one of the most controlled nations on Earth, apart from maybe like North Korea or Eritrea. Eritrea used to be in Africa, used to be a really, really highly controlled, they called it the North Korea of Africa. It used to be a really highly controlled nation, on par with any other really extremely despotic police state regime on Earth. So I think that's completely contrived, and I think it's made up. But I wanted to talk about the setup phases of fourth generation warfare, see if people had any questions, and I also wanted to talk about some of the aspects of, things I've covered and why I've covered it in the way I have, because really I touch on a lot of things that nobody else will touch for whatever reason, either because they falsely perceive that it's either fringe or they won't touch it because they don't know enough about it to touch it. So I cover the things that most others are afraid to touch. And I wanted to see if anybody had any questions. Let me see who's all here before I really start going into things here a little bit more. Let's see who's here. Hey, Angry Scandinavian. Yeah, I don't either, Angry Scandinavian. I don't believe they're in any sort of trouble whatsoever at all. I think Chinese are fabricating that like they do everything else. I think they're completely creating that to give them a sense of plausible deniability because it goes along perfectly with their setup period, their setup phase for fourth generation warfare. The economic warfare part of it, that is, because we know that there's many different pillars in their hybrid war doctrines. Hold on, let me light my cigarette here. Hold on. Okay. Anyways, we know that their setup phase for hybrid warfare, also known as fourth generation warfare, involves a lot of subterfuge, sabotage, and also weaponizing of institutions against the host nation, their own institutions, like becoming a parasite, where they go in, they infect the host by infiltrating and subverting the target nation's own institutions and weaponizing them against the people via subversion, infiltration. They do that with institutions in the regime every bit as much as they do it with businesses, corporations, financial institutions now. The fact that they're even doing it with financial institutions shows how close to achieving their overall plans that they really are. Once they've gotten into the financial institutions, you control the money, or you can impact the money at least, then you're very near to where you can collapse a nation. Because if you can influence their finances, you can collapse their finances and thereby do the most damage. Look, if they dump their debt too, if they dump all their bonds, their bond holdings, all the petrodollar, all their petrodollars and petrodollar holdings, if they dump them and they set a precedent to where everybody else dumps them, and they've already really set themselves up for that. I've already told everybody they've slowly been setting themselves up where it will actually not hurt them hardly at all to be able to do that, because they've already started selling some of their bonds and diversifying and starting to do a petro yuan as well, besides diversifying and buying up precious metals and whatever else they've been doing and other holdings in other currencies. They've already been setting themselves up to where it'll actually be more advantageous than harmful for them to be able to dump the petrodollar that they hold, and that'll create a domino effect, and it'll hurt us a lot more than it'll hurt them to really be able to do that. It'll be advantageous to them because that's how they will finally collapse us and break us down to where we're extremely weak. You can't fund your armed forces. You can't fund anything when you have no value in your money, when nobody will take your money. Because it's extremely inflated, like Weimar Republic type of inflated. That will happen. That will happen. You will see that. Mark my words. You will see that there will come a day. And they have a major impact on that. People really underestimate that. They have the ability to do that. They're setting themselves up for it. Just like how the sanctions boomeranged. Yeah, hey everybody. Hey Ann. Hey NWO Nemesis and Jeffrey and He First Loved Me and Angry Scandinavian. Everybody, welcome. Yeah, they've set themselves up to where really they can collapse us when they're ready to. It's not going to be hard for them. They've already levied economic warfare against us. They've levied financial warfare against us by subverting and infiltrating the financial institutions of Western nations. They can totally collapse the West at will once all their pieces are in position. I think, again, that they're creating a lot of these stories as far as like the Lyris in Shanghai and the river supposedly drying up. I don't think China's hurting at all either. Like Angry Scandinavian said, I don't even believe that for one bit. They've been maneuvering themselves into position to be able to finish us off once and for all. Everybody has to always remember that is the prime objective of the CCP. That's like, we are their saving grace. People don't understand that. If they're able to colonize our land, then that will save them because they will have have any revolts because they'll be food independent. That's their goal, to become food independent, where they no longer have to import food from anybody, including their allies like Russia. China wants to become food independent, and what better to do that than to colonize your biggest enemy, who has some of the most arable farmland in the world, which is us, North America in general, because Canada as well, but really us too, the American Midwest and all the other food growing areas that require irrigation or whatever else, that they can take it over and take it for themselves, and it's going to be plenty to feed their entire population to where they won't be hurting for nothing. That's why they want to see. Our resources are another reason, but they really just want the food. They want the food more than anything, but they'll take the other resources, of course, that are under the ground here and everything else. They'll just benefit them. All the slave labor from all the people that they capture, everything. So the thing is that they're getting into their final setup phases for their invasion. The last shoes to drop, really there's two, but you might as well just call it one, because really when the collapse happens, the big collapse, and it will, when the big collapse happens, that's going to set off the internal conflict, the Syrian-style internal conflict. That's what they're really waiting on. They're waiting on that. But in order for that to even occur, they have to have all their ducks in a row as far as like collapsing the finances and our economy. They have to collapse our finances and our economy. The food and fuel is part of that, which also affects the logistical system. You can't move freight. You cannot move freight of any sort without fuel. You cannot do that. All this green stuff and everything, they've been egging that on. The Western satanic elites want that, but they want it for their alleged reset, even though it's not viable whatsoever at all. But the Chi-Coms have been egging that on. They've been egging it on. You saw it at Davos when a Chi-Com agent called the president of Alibaba was in there. Alibaba is like the Chi-Com Amazon. He was in there, even though the CCP wasn't invited in any official capacity. If you're the president of Alibaba, you're part of the CCP. You might as well be. So you had to kiss the ring to get that position. So they're egging it on. They're saying, yeah, do your green energy stuff, you guys. Right on. Rock on, dude. Green energy. Keep doing it, because it's economy killing stuff. We all know this. We all know it's killing the economy. It's going to kill our finance too, because in the West, economics and finance are, linked together. For the most part, it's capitalism. It's like corporatism, really. Because now that they've killed like small business ownership in so many places, it's really like corporatism. It's like a fascist republic. But regardless, it's still market driven. It's still a market driven system, even though it's like corporatist mostly now. That a lot of small businesses have died over the past 2 years. And in America, the small business used to be the backbone of our economy. Now, when they closed everything down, they killed off about, a third of the economy right off the bat, right off the nose. They even said that. The Fed said that in their own words. They admitted it. 2 years later, none of it's come back. And you can almost, bet your bottom dollar that, that there's no growth whatsoever at all. And not only that, but I would even say that we've lost even more. I would say that our economy has shrunk by well over a third by now. Nothing is creating new jobs in this economy. Not here, so we know that, all that's doing is making the profiteers wealthier while continuously stripping, the middle class of any ownership of anything, they have no stake in anything anymore. It's all over, The country's basically over with at this point. It's not the same country that it was even like a few years ago. It's not even the same country it was 10 years ago. See, when I got out of the Army was a different organization back then. It was professional. It was sharp. They didn't start chiseling away at it quite yet. as far as like the multi-year long, counterinsurgency wars that we fought, yeah, I mean, I guess they chiseled away at it in the sense that, a lot of good people, their lives were ruined, they lost limbs and all this other stuff. But that's what happens in conflicts, okay? You're going to have injured, wounded people, dead people. But as far as, it chiseled away at the resources here and there, but, from fighting a multi-year long counterinsurgency, because instead of preparing to fight another major power, we were focused on fighting counterinsurgency operations. We were focused on, fighting irregular forces. And when you're fighting irregular forces, you tend to invest your money in weapon systems that are designed to fight irregulars and not designed to fight other field armies. So yeah, in that sense, yeah, it did chisel away at us, but the moral decay really didn't begin until about exactly 10 years ago. Like right about the time I was getting out of the Army, as a matter of fact. That's when they repealed that certain thing. That was their first step to wokeifying our armed forces. And it really didn't get really bad, like horribly bad, until, a few years back. That's when everything really started to go downhill at an accelerated rate of speed. So now, you already know that the CCP had their hands in that as well. They had their hands in it. They get representation. They're allowed to buy property. They're allowed to they're allowed to influence the puppets that they buy or that they extort through their MSS, the Chinese MSS, which is their equivalent of like their secret police. They're like law, like their law enforcement, their counterintelligence and their spying agency all rolled into one. And they even liaison with their armed forces, like as like battlefield intel. They do all of those things. Like their MSS also has operations where they cultivate proxies, and they also capture, as far as like capture, I mean like they capture the leaders of other nations in compromising situations and then turn them around and flip them and use them as agents. So that's what I mean by them taking some of the puppets and manipulating them by threat of ruining their lives and careers. They manipulate them and flip them and turn them into traitors and use them to implement CCP-friendly policies, which they are. And they use them as their loyal stooges to thus, work against the interests of our nation and cripple it and weaken our armed forces. And, they've done a spectacular job insofar as that goes at destroying everything, being the traitors and scumbags that they are. So they have done a spectacular job. It's not only the Western elites causing that, so that they can do their whatever reset, which will never happen because the CCP's version of the world is what's going to come. And that's going to be, they're going to colonize a large chunk of North America along with Russia. Russia is going to get their Arctic Circle turf back that they once had, be that Alaska, and they're also going to expand and take northern, Canadian 3 territories, Nunavut, Yukon, and Northwest territories. That's been their overarching goal, is to control the resources. I'm talking about Russia now. To control the resources of the Arctic Circle. They want to rule the whole Arctic and all its resources, which is an immense amount of resources, be it like the petrol, that they can produce out of the oil that's up there, the natural gas, the mineral wealth, like all the iron ore, all the coal, there's all kinds of mineral wealth up there and all kinds of fuel. They would have an immense amount of resources by turning the Arctic into a Russian lake, proverbially speaking. But the Chi-Coms, they want a large portion of North America. They want the whole lower 48, and they want the lower portion of Canada, the actual provinces. See, that Canada has territories and provinces. The territories are the northern 3 along the Arctic, and then you have the provinces, which are in the south. Now, China wants to control, southern Canada and the lower 48, and Russia wants the Arctic Circle. So, that's exactly what they're going to do. And they're well on their way to achieving their aims. So I'm going to start talking to people here. If anybody has anything they want to say, please do. I didn't want to go on a monologue the entire time, but I there is a lot to talk about regardless, but I want to see what the crowd is saying here. I sort of want to interact with people tonight. it's an informal stream, so let's see what people have to say here. If I can get the chat to show up. Let's see. Yeah, Angry Scandinavian. Yeah, the limo driver was, yeah, of course. And that's just a known one. That's only a known one. Imagine how many other Chi-Com spies are running around, how many MSS agents, stalk the streets of our nation. It's crazy. It's crazy. The level of subversion and infiltration is insane. It's like ludicrous level insane. It's obnoxious. Yeah, the Chi-Coms are the Fourth Reich. They're going to have their Fourth Reich. They're and the Chinese aren't even German. They're going to have their own Fourth Reich, and it's going to be, their colonization of North America, and Russia is going to get their Arctic Circle territories. The Europe too. Russia's going to rule pretty much Europe at this point. Europe has been castrated. Europe has basically castrated themselves too. They're no threat to anybody. They're a joke. Yeah, they're an utter joke. Yeah. I like how Jeffrey. I like how you call the Chinese the red coats, the red Chinese, the red dragon. Yeah. Yeah, they're all. Yeah, China. Yeah, Jeffrey. China basically controls the tallywhackers. They control them. They moved in there right after we were leaving anyway. They've been in there. They've been actually cultivating a lot of those proxies to go after us while we were even still there. Exactly. Yep. Yeah, the Chi-Coms are all over the world. They're all over the third world. They're in basically every third world nation. They're subverting them through the Belt and Road. They're taking control all over the place through Belt and Road, whether that's through their economic and financial dominance or whether it's through their infiltration and subversion. And there's all sorts of ways they're taking control, and they're doing it in the West. It's going to be a Chinese and Russian world, basically. And of course there are other 8 allies, which are the other 8 kings. There's going to be 10 kings that will reign with the man of sin, the beast. For 1 hour, they'll give their power to the beast, and they'll have their one world government for a short time, because 1 hour in biblical time is not a lot of time at all. We're talking months. Before it all falls apart and there's infighting. It's bound to happen because people get greedy, even world rulers. That's what always happens because Satan can't help himself. He eats his own. It's always the way it is. Yeah, I hear you, Angry Scandinavian. Yeah, there's a lot of things going on. Speaking of Chicago, I had shared that one video about the issue with the link cards or the food stamps up there, and that sounds so eerily like the way my internal Syrian style thing began. It really does. It really does. Now, I don't know if they've restored them, because like I even said before I shared it, I gave a disclaimer that I'm not saying anything will happen, but it sure looked like it at that moment, because that's exactly what was the first domino in my scenario. They had issues with the food stamps. It caused rioting, and that's when they violently suppressed the riots in my hypothetical. But then, that's what kicked everything off, because it actually ended up backfiring, and that's what created the whole situation in the first place. That was like the first domino that went in that scenario. So very, very lifelike. My work is very lifelike. It's very realistic. The thumbnail I made, it was a small collage of my art, my concept artwork. I had one from the Broken Bow story where it was the Chinese Q5 that was swooping down to drop a few, 500-pounders and strafe the fleeing, vehicles, and then I had the other one that was in Phoenix, where the Chinese H-6K heavy strategic bombers were flying over, dropping ordnance. And then the one below that was the battle that was at Waco, where the Chinese, I had their, that was like outside of like West Waco, where you could see the Brazos River and you could see the Chinese artillery firing, and you could see some of the vehicles of one of their companies going into the westernmost part of the city there. I mean, I got pretty detailed with the concept art, but yeah, that those even though that's for now, that's concept art. That's extremely vivid and lifelike. It's extremely vivid and lifelike. It really is. Those things. Those things will actually end up being very common sights when we get invaded. You're going to see that type of stuff. It's going to happen. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's going to basically jump off the artwork and become the reality. I mean, and there's nothing anybody can really do about it, which is why I do what I do here to try to help people be able to navigate it and sidestep it so that they're not caught up in it. You don't want to be in any of that. You want to get away from it. All the successful people that lasted in my stories and in my work in general were people that knew how to get the hell out of the hot zone. They knew how to get away from the problems when they started. They didn't go looking for problems, at least not at the beginning, because they realized that it was too perilous with the grid out, with the internet out, with communications out, with no ability to really use radios within, even the emergency kind within the electronic warfare jamming sphere of the Russian and Chinese electronic warfare assets and systems. They had to do their best to get away from all the fighting. They had to at least get out of the hot zone until they were able to see that things had calmed down and that the occupation was setting in. At least in the invasion phase, you don't want to be out in the middle of the streets or wherever, because that's how you're going to get yourself ripped up into pieces, because they're going to see you before you even see them, because they have working communications. They can coordinate their activities. They have real-time battlefield intel from drones and recon planes and everything else. You won't have access to any of that because you won't be able to see where they are or where they're even coming from. You won't. That's called actionable intel. You will not have actionable intel while they do have actionable intel, meaning that they can spot you before you even know where they are or where they're coming from. They can get you with precision strikes before you even know that they're coming, because they have things that can get you while you can't meanwhile get them. That's why you want to get away from all that type of shit, at least at the very beginning. When we're being invaded, you want to get away from all of that. I showed that in the work, in the hypotheticals. So, those were the people that lasted the longest, were the people that knew that, okay, we don't know where they're coming from. We don't know where they're at. We don't have no actionable intel, none of that. Those were the people that lasted because they realized what the score was. They knew what the score was. And they knew that if they were to be out in the open somewhere or looking for a confrontation, they would get basically butchered. Even there was a character in part 7 and part 8 in my very first story. His name was Tony. Tony was the guy that, along with a group of other farmers and people that didn't really, they heard Broken Bow was being basically surrounded, and they tried to, come to the aid of their friends in the town, people they knew that were in the town. They wanted to come help them because they had heard from people that were basically runners, people that were on the ground, because they had no way of communicating. There were runners, like how Paul Revere said that the Redcoats were coming. The Redcoats, it was the Red Chinese are coming. The Red Chinese are coming. So these runners they went out to all the different rural areas around the town, the small town. They spread the news of what was going on, and the people heard the blasting and the shooting. They heard it, but they didn't know what was going on because there was no communication, there was no TV, no nothing, no internet, no nothing. So they went off of what the runners told them. They decided to band together and come and try to, help the people in their town, that was, in the nearby town. So they all got together. They went towards Broken Bow. and they hid in the wood lines, and they tried to take pot shots at the Chi-Coms, at their armored vehicles, which did nothing, but scraped the paint on it, really, because we're talking about small arms up against armored vehicles. I mean, they may have hit like one of the gunners or wounded them, but the return fire they caught from their gunners was savage. They were being hit by tank shells from the tanks. They were being hit by heavy machine gun ammunition. They were being hit by rockets, and they stood no chance. They basically got annihilated, and they even got chased down back to Tony's house. Like, two of the armor personnel carriers peeled off the main attack group, and they followed the road and they could see the Americans running down the rural road and turning into a property. So they followed him all the way to his house. They rammed through the gate, because some rural properties have those gates where you can like swing it closed and lock it. Well, they rammed right through it and smashed their way in, and then they went down to his home. They one of their squads outflanked their position at his home on his property. They went through the woods and outflanked them. So the two were laying down fire in a classic L shape, and then they called in an airstrike where this Q-5 flew in and dropped a 1,000-pound napalm tank on them and just utterly incinerated the home and everybody in it and around it. But that's the type of stuff I'm talking about. Like, people who have no idea what's going on, but they go looking for trouble, are going to be basically crushed, by different types of things. You're going to have so many different threats. Like, that is why the people that lasted the longest were the people that waited for things to calm down. They waited for the situation to shift from an invasion phase where it was full, weapons blazing. They waited, because they're coming in hot. They're coming in with everything blazing. Their Air Force, their Navy, their Army, their everything. They're coming in with everything blazing, right? They're paramilitary too, even. Throw that in there. They're coming in with everything blazing. They're coming in hot. So if you are out there and you can be seen easily, you're like a crazy man, trying to confront them, you're going to get butchered. You're not even going to stand a chance. The smart people were the ones that evacuated first. Then they waited for the occupation to set in. See, it went from an all weapons blazing situation during the initial invasion phase, and it switched to an occupation. An occupation is more like a sort of like, I guess you would call that in military terms, you would call that a policing action, where they turned into like doing patrols and just stuff like that, where it turned into like an occupation. The Chinese started doing patrols, and they started, like the Russians too, and their allies. They started doing patrols in the stories and in the in the maps and everything, 'cause that's what they would have been doing once they took over. Once they're in that sort of a phase, then it's much easier to find out what's going on. You can sort of ascertain what's exactly going on, and then you can, like, once you've ascertained and figured out what's going on, then you have an opportunity to potentially do something about it. But you want to be alive. You want to be able to make it to where you can do something. Like, you don't want to get just like wiped out in the initial phase, and you're just a reactionary fool who gets themselves annihilated by whatever. That's basically why I wrote the stories and the scenarios the way I wrote them and made them, the hypotheticals. That's why the people in them that lasted were the people that did those things. I hope that makes sense, because that's the way it would be. So let me see what people are saying. Angry Scandinavian. I know you know what I mean. Yeah, exactly. That's why I told people in those scenarios that the people ran for the woods. They ran for the forests, the woods. They ran for the wilderness. In other words, they went to the woods, they went into the mountains, they did, or went out way into the deserts or whatever. Wherever there were no people, that's where they wanted to be, to get away from the trouble. And if they went out into the deserts, they hid in the clefts of rocks or whatever, because there's deserts that have plenty of rocks you can hide in, or caves or whatever. There's all sorts of places people could go. Like, you've seen those deserts in the American Southwest where they have like buttes and big, humongous rock formations you can hide in. I mean, there's all sorts of places people went that was out in the wilderness where they could get away from human settlements, key infrastructure, big roads. That's the whole idea. You don't want to be anywhere near where they have logistical capabilities as far as like roads and established, trails that they would use for their logistics. You want to get away from that stuff because logistics, wherever they can move their logistics, they can move their forces because their forces run off of logistics. If they can move supplies to supply their troops, then they can get you if you're in that area. But if you're way out in the middle of nowhere where it's a pain in the ass for them to move supplies and their forces, then you have a real chance at making it. You have a real opportunity at making it, even potentially even defending yourself, like if you're in a group or something. So like a survival group or whatever, because they would only be able to send out light forces after you if you're in some place that's in a pain. It's like a pain in the ass for them to send like heavy forces or like armor or whatever, that where they could only send light forces. You would then have a better chance than you would, and I mean small forces, like small light forces. Like if you're like way up in the mountains, or if you're like, way out in the desert somewhere that's way far away from any roads or whatever, you want to be away from human civilization, in other words, because those are the places that armies go for first. It never fails. They always try to capture human settlements first, key infrastructure first, installations first. All that stuff is their primary objectives when they invade another country. They always go for key infrastructure, installations, and human settlements. Those are always the first top three things that they go for. Otherwise, like small, like single homes and like way out in the middle of nowhere, like rural empty, areas that, those like with scattered homes and farms, those are like the last places that get messed with generally, unless they're near like a key objective. But like if they're like way away from everything, like those are the last places to be bothered in an invasion in any sort of country. It doesn't matter what country. Rural outlying areas, tertiary areas, as I called them in the scenarios, those are absolutely the last places that get bothered in an invasion. Usually that doesn't start getting messed with until the occupation sets in and the country's already fallen because all the major stuff has been captured, like the big cities, the medium cities, small cities, installations, roads, and like the big roads, like highways and, all that stuff. Like when you've captured all that stuff, you pretty much have the country. So then all you have to do is send your occupation forces out into like the hinterlands to enforce your occupation on everybody. But that doesn't usually happen until the invasion part's over with. And when that's done, then they spread out. But that's why I made the stories the way I wrote them. I wrote them exactly the way it would be, exactly how it would be, using their doctrines. I'm talking about the Chinese and Russian war doctrines. I used their own doctrines, their own manuals, their own words, their own everything, their own books, like the one that those adjutant PLA colonels wrote, the two that wrote that unrestricted warfare book. I used that too. That's their own doctrines, their own words. That's the way they would do it, because they married Blitzkrieg with the Trojan horse concept, with also a setup phase and also advanced technology. The setup phase is when they weaken their enemy, their target enemy, by subverting and infiltrating, and then they establish their Trojan armies. They base them inside the enemy nation, the host nation, the enemy to be conquered. Then, during the setup phase, they import their logistics and troops and vehicles, and all the while they're also subverting and weaponizing the institutions against the host nation and their own people and everything else. That is the way it works. That's how fourth generation warfare works. There's a setup phase. It all begins with compromising a nation's leaders. Once that they can compromise a nation's leaders, then they can start extorting them, coercing them to make like CCP-friendly policies that allow them to buy property. Then they buy the property. Once they buy the property, then they start importing their forces, while they're still subverting and weakening the host nation, the target nation, to be conquered. And then when they're sufficiently satisfied with the weakening that's been undergone, then they invade. That's how fourth generation warfare hybrid warfare. The fourth generation warfare and hybrid warfare are the same thing. So that's how it works, folks. Nobody tells you the details about this like I do, because I don't think there's really anybody out there looking into it like I do. Oh yeah, sure, there's people that talk about China invading, but they talk about it in like a World War II sort of a concept. Like they think it's just going to be like, you're going to have like front lines, like fixed front lines that move. And no, it's not going to be like World War II. It's not going to be World War II. This is a whole new doctrine. Sort of like how Blitzkrieg was a new doctrine. See, you had first generation warfare, which was like two armies marching across the field at each other, be it with like archers and swordsmen, or be it with muskets or whatever. Then it switched to second generation warfare, which was trench warfare, trenches, trench warfare, static defense. Then it went to third generation warfare, which was blitzkrieg, your blitzkrieg. See, the French, they thought World War II was going to be second generation warfare, like World War I. They were still fighting the last war. Sounds like us, thinking it's going to be like World War II, but it's not. It's not. The new doctrines are going to shock the whole world when they're unveiled. It's like, the French thought it was going to be World War I, but it was actually a whole different doctrine. Blitzkrieg got used on them. They got surrounded and destroyed. They got outflanked, outmaneuvered, surrounded, and destroyed in pockets. That's how it worked. It was maneuver warfare, but fourth generation warfare is mixing maneuver warfare with the Trojan horse, with new advanced technologies like cyber warfare, advanced electronic warfare, hypersonics, directed energy weapons, all sorts of things. It's mixing all of that together into a devastating combination of doctrines and technologies and ways of fighting a war. It is so devastating that it's going to take the world by complete shock when they unveil it. Sort of like how Blitzkrieg shocked the world of the 1940s, or 1939, 1940s, early 40s. Blitzkrieg shocked the world because, see, the Germans were taking over countries in a matter of weeks, whereas in World War I, when it was like second generation warfare, things moved gruelingly slow. Like they barely took any ground in a year. Like it took like years for them to take any sort of ground, seriously. Like there were times when the front lines barely even moved like at all. It was just trading a bunch of artillery, and it was basically just that. It was static defense and artillery warfare. Yeah, sure, they introduced planes into war, and they also introduced like chemical weapons, and they introduced new weapons like submarines, and they also introduced the submarine's been around since like the American Civil War, but I'm saying like they used them in a large scale in World War I, like chemical weapons and subs and machine guns, like not Gatling guns like the original old school machine guns. I'm talking about like belt-fed weapons that were devastating. And the tank was first introduced in World War I, but especially there towards the end. They finally started achieving breakthroughs, but it was still slow. It wasn't like World War II level breakthroughs. Like the tanks were really primitive. The tanks barely were fast. They weren't fast at all. The conditions inside of them were horrible. It was really hot inside of them. The engine, the fumes, and it would sicken the crew and make them pass out. And it was a horrible job to have, to be inside the tank. I mean, you might survive the machine gun bursts, but you wouldn't it'd be miserable working conditions. But that was like when the primitive ground was laid for newer doctrines that would come along later, like the doctrines of World War II. And then now that's been basically worn out, our enemies have been searching for a new way to wage war. So they came up with hybrid warfare, fourth generation warfare, that literally encompasses every aspect of, it's like total war, like everything, economic, financial, setting up your forces inside of a nation, like by Trojan horse means, subversion, all of it. It's all integrated into one thing. It may look separate because it gives them an air of plausible deniability, but it's all working together. It's all together. It's working together to be able to set up your enemy for a rapid takedown, a TKO move, where they go en bak on our ass and kick our head off. That's basically what it'll be like, too. It'll be so fast, it'll shock the world. It'll be over in a matter of days. Days. It ain't going to be no months or years. It'll be over in days. It won't even be a week. It'll be over quick. It'll be over quick. It'll be over as fast as it takes for forces to fan out across the country this vast. That's as long as it'll take, just a matter of days. That's why I made it 4 days, because of all the driving distances that had to be covered in the, in the hypotheticals. The nation is vast. You would have to drive. Your forces would have to drive like nonstop and make really good time for it to be over in, anything shorter than like really 4 days. You would have to be fighting the whole way, and you would have to be surrounding and spreading out, fanning out different areas. I mean, it would take at least 4 days. It would take, by day 2, a lot of the fighting would be over, true enough, but it wouldn't be really completely over until like day 4. That's why I made it a 4-day invasion. It was called 96-hour invasion. That's 4 days. Sort of like how the ground campaign in the Gulf War was only 4 days. Like Saddam's army was crushed in 4 days on the ground, Sure, there was a long air campaign, but I'm talking about the actual ground invasion of Iraq and the liberation of Kuwait. That was over in 4 days, But this would be on such a humongous scale. It would be 4 times bigger than the biggest invasion in all of human history, which is Operation Barbarossa. Well, three to 4 times bigger. It would have to involve at least a bare minimum of 10 million troops, a bare minimum, but 12 million would really be ideal, or more. See, in my scenario, I made it 12.5 million, which was plenty for such an undertaking of such a large nation, such a the population it has, and because remember, 1940s USSR wasn't like 2020's USA. It wasn't fully developed yet. Like most of the developed parts of the Soviet Union lay between like the St. Petersburg, Moscow, and Stalingrad line, most of it, and then to the western border with the Axis nations. And Germany conquered nearly all of that. So, really there wasn't much left of the USSR as far as like developed territory. I mean, there were some cities beyond that, but they weren't really like they are now. Like today's Russia, like Siberia is more developed than it once was. I mean, you have more cities there than there used to be. I mean, because most of that part of the Soviet Union back then, you have to understand, it was like a lot of log cabins, like villages made of log cabins, like really primitive areas. I mean, yeah, they had a few cities here and there, but it was like that's a humongous territory. So like the occasional city like Yekaterinburg or like, you had like Tashkent and like, cities like that were like BFE, like the saying goes, they were like podunk cities, like just really not fully developed. A lot of them didn't have electricity, I mean, they had some, but it wasn't like, like today where you have modern, conveniences everywhere and there's more cities built up and the population really grew. It wasn't like that back then. 1940s Soviet Union was really primitive compared to what it grew into after the war, and even today, Russia has developed a lot of its Asiatic lands in Siberia compared to what it once was back in the Soviet days. It wasn't anything like it is now, but the world was a different place back then. But basically, that's the general gist of what I came on here to discuss, was just the subject matter that I covered and why it's so important. And we would be definitely invaded by a humongous invasion force, because anything bigger than 12 million is a lot of forces, because the old Soviet Union in the 40s was invaded by 4 million troops. 4 million. And that, to this day, even to this day, is the still single biggest invasion in the history of war, in all of human history. Operation Barbarossa, when the Nazis invaded the USSR. That is still, to this day, the biggest invasion the world has ever seen. But that will be topped like in my hypothetical scenarios, it'll be topped in real life because you would need an immensely bigger force to invade a country this big, this populated, this well developed. You would need a humongous invasion force. It would have to be at least 3 to 4 times bigger than even what Barbarossa was. And China can pull it off. They could either pull it off by themselves or with allies, and they will have allies. So Russia, we know, is their chief ally. Even though Russia is nowhere near as big as China in terms of numbers, they're still big enough to where they would commit a substantial amount to that force. It would probably be a few million. They could commit a few million, while still maintaining their obligations in Europe and at home. And you know, when I say Europe, I mean like European Russia, the Kaliningrad enclave, whatever they got going on in Syria, Ukraine, and they could handle that. They could manage that with like a million or so, but they could send 2 million to help the Chinese here. The Chinese can send easily 10 million. They could send even more if they wanted to. They have it. They're paramilitary, and plus their active military and reserves is humongous. It's immense. It's gargantuan. They could manage even by themselves, but the Russians, they would help definitely substantially. Because a few million would be substantial. Then there are other foreign allies, like they would probably make a foreign expeditionary force where they each contributed maybe 500,000 to 1 million. Like you got fairly decently sized allies. Relative to the size of their nations, they're pretty moderately sized. I mean, you got Pakistan with well over 1 million forces. You got Iran, they're about 1 million. You got North Korea too, they're over 1 million. I mean, you got moderately sized forces. Even Belarus has a decently sized military when you take their reserves into account. Considering the size of their land, their nation. I mean, it's moderately sized. I mean, for their size, they would all contribute to a foreign expeditionary force too to chip in for the invasion. They all would. Nicaragua, Cuba, they would all contribute too. They would all contribute something to it. So we'd know that this would be the biggest invasion in all of human history that would top even Operation Barbarossa by a lot, by like 3 or 4-fold. It would have to be. Because a land this vast to occupy it, like, you're not going to do it with just a few million. You need an immense amount of forces to occupy a land this big and this populated, and including this well equipped. You would need an immense amount of forces. But the reason why, they want things as easy as possible is to lighten their workload. They don't want to experience very many losses if they can help it. I mean, either way, they're going to kick our ass around the battlefield. They're going to whoop our ass, but the problem is that they don't want to have any losses. They don't want to experience losses if they can help it, which is why they want us to do the job for them and basically rip ourselves apart. That's why they're stoking all the problems we have. They want to see infighting. They want to see us collapse. They want to see a Syrian style, thing, because they know that if that happens, it'll wear us down even more, to where it would just make it that much easier for them. I mean, whereas if that didn't happen, like in the best case, and remember, my invasion scenarios, all my invasion work is based on a best case for us, and we still lose horribly bad. I mean, it's a horrible. It even ends horrible, and that's the best case ending. The best case ending that I created was even still a pretty horrible ending, where the Chicons decide to break even after a while, and they decide to go home, and they leave us as a Flintstones country with barely any people left in it because they either enslaved or murdered everybody. Yeah, that's a horrible ending. I mean, we never were able to rebuild ourselves after it. I go read the stories. I put it all in the finales. It goes over what the ending is. I mean, it goes over why it ends that way, and even if that's the best case ending, that's still a horrible ending. It's horrible. Where they break even, they maybe make a little bit off their occupation, but not much. But they about break even. But they lost plenty of people trying to occupy this place, but they break even because they did manage to, pillage and plunder, and then they leave us a desolate wasteland where our biggest buildings are like 3-story buildings that are like Flintstones buildings that people rigged up and out of rubble, and yeah, we're never able to rebuild ourselves. That's a horrible ending. But that's the way I made it end. That's a best case scenario. That's a best case in an invasion where we didn't have an internal conflict. We are able to put up a moderate resistance. We get occupied, we get crushed in the invasion, but we are able to put up a moderate level of resistance, and they finally break even and they decide to leave. We didn't beat them, but they just decided to leave because they didn't want it to become more trouble than it was worth, and they left us a desolate wasteland. That is a horrible ending. Still a horrible ending. The worst case for us, I don't even want to imagine that. I don't even want to imagine a worst case. A worst case is where they never leave and they've totally like gutted us and they've gotten everything they ever wanted. That's the worst case for us. And I'm talking about the Chi-Coms and Russians. They get everything they want with minimal issues, and they're able to completely profit off of us and take slaves and pillage us and colonize us, and that's the worst case for us, and they never leave. Like that's the absolute worst case where they're like superbly victorious. Whereas the best case for us is like they call it even and just go home and leave us a wasteland. So either way, it's bad. I mean, we have a horrible future ahead of us. So I want people to be able to navigate that, to navigate it, to be able to survive it. I take what I do here very seriously. I take it very seriously because I care enough about people to where I want people to see what this is going to look like and why and how. Because I care about people. If I didn't give a shit, I wouldn't share none of this with nobody. I wouldn't share none of this with nobody. I ain't getting no money for this. I mean, I'm taking time out of my life to help people. I ain't getting nothing for it. In fact, I mostly just get a headache for it because I have to deal with a bunch of ass clowns that, shills and whatever else, and shadow banning and all the garbage that, gets dumped on me. But you know what they say? No good deed goes unpunished. No good deed goes unpunished. So, I'm still going to continue to do the right thing regardless. I'm going to continue to finish my project, my audiobook that I've already started. And once that's done, then I'm off of YouTube. By that point, everybody should have everything they need, because by then, even the people that don't like to read, who don't go read the stories, they'll now have a story to listen to that talks about the happenings on the ground from a character level point of view. So that way, everything will be there for everybody. Everybody will be able to either read or listen to the stories. Everybody will be able to watch all the documentaries, and everybody will even be able to go look at the community tab story reviews, and thus be able to learn how best to survive and like on the ground level. They can go to the community tab story review right now. They can learn about nomadism and semi-nomadism. They can go there right now and learn about field sanitation while they're nomadic. They can go there right now and learn about, just a whole variety of things, tactics, like small unit tactics, all of it. They can go there right now and learn about it. Go learn about everything, a little bit of everything. It starts off like building blocks. It starts off really simple, really primitive, really basic, but then I work my way up to more advanced concepts and issues, considering where it starts. It starts very basic with organization, and then it sort of works up from there as building blocks. So always read the description boxes, because I can fit more sometimes in those description boxes in all my older videos than I even can in the videos themselves. I'm talking about the short ones, because when I used to have to make short videos, they were pre-recorded and then loaded up, meaning that I had to record them first and then I loaded them to YouTube, and they were really short videos because I only had limited record time because I have this piece of trash phone. I have one of the most primitive phones that you can even imagine. I am working with very low budget equipment here, okay? I even draw my own concept art and I make my own maps. I'm very low budget. This is low budget History Channel, okay? And no, it's too late in the game to get a new phone. I'm not worried about a new phone. I'm just going to work with what I got. I'm grateful to God for what I have, for what I already have. So no, I'm not concerned about getting a new phone. I'm just going to continue doing what I'm doing. It's good enough for me. I'm going to finish my audiobook, and that'll be it. So let me talk to the audience here before I, get going. See who's all in here. What's going on? What's everybody talking about? If anybody wants to say anything relating to the subjects I just discussed, please do, because, I'm down to stay on here a little longer if people are actually going to talk about these things. What's everybody saying here? Hold on, I got to push buttons. Okay. Hey there, Lady M. Great to see you. You read all my stories. I know you read all my stories. I used to see you in the comments there. And C-Mac, great to see you. I know who you are. And Ann Walsworth and Angry Scandinavian and, yep. Grace by Fire, wonderful to see you. And Jeffrey and who else is here? Yeah, Angry Scandinavian. Yep, those MSS Intel people. They're bad news. They're the ones that compromise people. They do proxies. They raise up proxies. They liaison with their PLA and PAP and other forces, and they also are like secret police thugs. They have like different like bureaus within their agency. It's sort of like the FSB that Russia has. The FSB is like the offshoot of the KGB, but the Chi-Com MSS is like their like C to the I to the A combined with like their secret police and their military battlefield like liaison intel people like rolled together into like one thing, sort of like the FSB too. Yeah, they even cultivate proxies and conduct like blackmail and subterfuge, sabotage, all of it, and infiltration, subversion. They're bad news. They're bad news. They are bad news. Intel agencies are dirty. It doesn't matter if they're Chinese, Russian, ours, who's ever. They're dirty. Even smaller nations like Germany have some dirty intel agencies too, like the BND. The BND is dirty. They're all dirty. Yep, they're all dirty. I hate having to push buttons so much. What is everybody saying here? Hey, MB, what's going on? Howdy. Good to see you. I didn't see you in there when I first looked. Yeah, yep. Yeah, Lady M, you gotta go out there in nature and have like supply caches where you put away your logistics, your food, your water, because you cannot operate as a single person, as a single human being. You're not going to operate very far from wherever your logistics are. You're just not. You have to eat, you have to drink. You can't carry everything on you. So it's not like a video game. Some people think it's like a video game where you can carry like unlimited ammo and unlimited whatever, food, whatever it is. People aren't thinking about the logistical part. You cannot operate as a human being without food, without water, without your ammo. You have to put it all somewhere. So you have to go out there and secure it. And you're not going to be able to operate very far from wherever your supplies are. You cannot operate far from your supplies. So if you have more caches, more spread out, the more spread out your supplies are, the further away you can function. Meaning like, okay, if you have everything in your house, you're not going to be able to operate very far from where your stuff is if it's all in your house. So you can't go far distances because you're going to need to be near your food, your water, your everything. Now, if you have everything spaced out in different places, you can go from place to place like a nomad. And when you need something, you can dig it up or wherever you put it. Think about it. You're not going to be able to operate or function, rather, as a human being unless you're near where your supplies are, your food, your everything. The further you are away from that stuff, then the less well off you're just going to be because you have to eat, you have to have the things you need. That's why you want to go out there, like in the community tab story reviews, where I even said, you need to go out there and you need to start putting away supplies out in nature. If you keep everything in one place, in one central location, and it gets overrun or, destroyed, then you're just shit out of luck. You're shit out of luck. That's why you need to go and take some of the things you've got and you need to put them somewhere so that you have a way to live if you go out there. I mean, I know people can hunt, they can fish, but hunting and fishing isn't always a for sure thing. You might need to eat something now, like to keep your energy level up, to be able to function. You might have to eat right then and there. What are you going to do? What if you can't hunt something? What if you can't fish something? Hunting and fishing is a great way to augment your diet, but you have to have a well-balanced means of survival. You can do some hunting and fishing, but you should also have some supplies put up. You should also have, if you're able to, know where you can forage at for food. Foraging meaning like go out in nature and find plants that are edible and eat them or whatever. Or you should even be able to do farming, but do it in such a way to where you plant a little bit of crops in one place and then in a little bit in another place. Like scatter them around so that it gives the appearance that it's wild, that it's growing wildly. Like don't make it obvious that, people are in the area. If you scatter, your gardening around in nature where where the plants are, they'll grow, and then you can go from plant to plant and eat a little here, eat a little there. What's the term for that? They call that like guerrilla gardening or whatever. That's where you plant different plants in like random areas, but where they are, and you can go and eat off of those if you need to. That's a real way of like farming out when you're nomadic or semi-nomadic. You can do it like that too. You can do it like that. You got to diversify your ways you survive. You got to diversify. So keep that in mind at all times. It's very important. It's very, very important. A lot of the stuff I do in my material that I cover, you can find examples of all of this stuff throughout my work, here and there, especially in the hypotheticals and the stories too. If people are paying attention, they'll catch like little things that the characters did or experienced or seen or whatever. You'll see a little bit of things that, of each thing that's covered in there, a little bit of everything. So there's plenty of examples. I went over a lot of it in the community tab story reviews, but I didn't go over every little last thing with a fine-tooth comb. But there's all kinds of goodies in those stories that you can learn from. It's why I wrote them. It's the whole purpose of writing them. So let's say a couple farewells, maybe talk about one or two more things if anyone's still in here that saying anything. All right. Yeah, angry Scandinavian. I agree. Yeah, those entrenchment tools suck, but I got my own. I got a short shovel like that. Like it's kind of like an e-tool, but it's a little bit better in my opinion. It just has a better feel to it. It's got a better handle and everything. I got to spray paint it though. It's yellow. I got to like spray paint it green, kind of camouflage it some. But it's a really nice shovel. But they were garbage. I didn't like them. Pain in the ass having to like fold them, unfold them, all that, secure them, and yep. All right, well, if everybody's out saying their good nights, then I'll say good night as well. Thank you to everybody who came. You all have a blessed night. Thank you. Take care.